Curvis. This is your host and producer, Jenny, with the 106th episode of the Curvis the Cube podcast. Oh my gosh, episode number 106. It is going fast, people. And this episode is with Jason Parsley. He is the executive director of South Florida Gay News. Now, we recorded this episode over a month ago, guys, but I needed to take a bit of a Curve the Cube hiatus because I needed to focus on so many, as I curve my own cube, focus on so many other wonderful things that have been happening in my world, which I will get into in great detail in a very, very special upcoming solo cast recapping the year. So look for that next week. So many wonderful things to talk to you guys about and update you on, and so many wonderful things to look forward to in 2017. So that is going to be a really, really fun episode to record and give you guys all that awesome info. But Jason and I met actually back on episode 102. If you rewind, you'll find that is the episode where I called it Veterans Day and the American Dream. I went down to a Veterans Day protest and interviewed a bunch of people as to why they were down there and so passionate about getting their voices heard after the presidential election. And one of the people I met on the street there was Jason Parsley, and he was so kind to stop in his lending his voice to the protest and lend his voice to that awesome podcast episode. So thank you for that, Jason, and I was so excited for that. I had to have him on again, all about him and South Florida Gay News. So South Florida Gay News focuses on gay life down here in South Florida, hence the name. But it's a huge, wide reach of topics, ranging from entertainment to politics. I mean, let's face it, folks, kind of all in the same right now, right? But it presents it in a way. You know, Jason is really, really focused on balancing between having the publication and the subject matter and everything be very gay community focused, but also presenting everything and all the people in a more broader sense to remind us all that their sexual orientation and the issues that go along with that aren't the only ways to define them. So it's a really, really interesting online publication and also offline publication. You can actually go and pick up a copy in your hands, people. It's amazing. So be sure to go to sfgn.com for the South Florida Gay News and find out where you can pick it up. You can follow South Florida Gay News at SOFLA Gay News. It's at SOFLA Gay News. And you can find and follow Jason himself at J.E. Parsley, like the herb, J.E. Parsley. Anyways, he's fantastic, and I do apologize a little bit for my performance on this episode. I was exhausted. I was running at about a million miles a minute when we recorded this, and I prepped a lot, but for some reason, when we actually sat down, my brain was like, all right, I'm out. So I apologize. It's a little clunky, but it's okay. I'm human, right? Right? Forgivable, I hope? Okay. So anyway, this episode of the Curve the Cube podcast was brought to you by my friend and hairstylist extraordinaire, Janice Massey. She is basically the local diva of natural hair. I mean, if you have natural hair, ladies and gentlemen, then you need to go see my dear friend Janice, because she can, or if you're thinking about going into a natural hairstyle, she also specializes in transition work. So she's great at not only doing the awesome lock maintenance like she does on my own lovely locks, but she can do like updos and stuff. And she does braiding, she does twists, she does all kinds of cool stuff. And she does really interesting like hair expo level like designs. She's pretty much thebomb.com. But speaking of a .com, be sure to go to janicemassey.com or Natural Hair by Janice Massey .com and check her out. Set up an appointment. You won't be disappointed. She is fantastic. Seriously, I would go there just to hang out with her because she's just a phenomenal human. And it's all about inspiring girl power all the way. So go support Janice Massey. And with that, I'll say sit back and relax and listen to this, the 106th episode of the Curve of the Cube podcast. Oh, and thank you to DJ Don Hitta for my music beds, by the way. All right. 106th episode of the Curve of the Cube podcast with executive editor of the South Florida Gay News, Mr. Jason Parsley. Enjoy. Curve the Cube will now initiate. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Great, how are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
You too.
Wow, what a nice place. I had a great Thanksgiving. How about you?
Yes.
Good.
Sure.
Good. So I'm so glad that we got a chance to sit and talk so soon after we last sat and, well, we didn't sit and talk last time, we stood and talked.
Yeah.
Because we met up at the protest, which was a very interesting evening.
Yes.
What was your what was your take on that night?
I think it was needed for
Yeah.
a lot of people
Yeah.
after the election results.
Yeah.
Unexpected election results.
Yeah.
People needed to get those feelings out,
Yeah.
and that's a great way to get them out.
Absolutely. It was very lethargic. I got that from the crowd. Like there was a lot that just needed to be said and
Yes.
voiced, and it was a good night. It was a good time. It was a good time.
They've been continuing it. So they had
know.
last week they had one, and then they just planned another one for Sunday.
Really?
This week, yeah.
Really? Wow. So the fight continues,
Yes.
I guess. So, I mean, when you were down there, I think I asked you the same kind of generic question I kind of asked everybody that night. But I would love if you wouldn't mind kind of repeating, why you were down there and what you felt. What was the voice that you needed to contribute to that night?
Well, I think that I went down there to support all of my Black, brown, queer, immigrant brothers and sisters,
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure that their voices were lifted up and heard,
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure that we continue to listen to those voices for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
And to make sure that the Republicans, and especially Donald Trump, they don't think that they have this mandate
Mm-hmm.
to silence any sort of dissent.
Because I think that's important, because this country, we have a somewhat of a unique place in history and in the world, and the kind of the ideals that the country was founded on. And one of those ideals is that protest is a good thing.
Yes.
And, protest against the government peacefully, but
Yes.
use your voices and your votes. And when the votes don't work, use your voices again to protest and make sure that, we're allowed vehicles to fight for other people whose voices may not be able to be as lifted. So.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the disheartening aspects, is to hear the other side.
Mm-hmm.
This sort of motto of give him a chance, give him a chance. We
Yeah.
shouldn't protest. We should just accept the result in silence.
Right.
And
Country won't progress that way.
8 years ago, the Tea Party started as soon as Obama took office.
Right. Right.
No one
People
told
forget that.
No one told them to give him a chance.
Mm-hmm.
No one told them to shut up and accept it. No one told them those
They
things.
told him hang from a noose. Some of them said hang from a noose, or just
Or
refuse.
we're gonna do everything we can to block your agenda
We
and
want him to fail.
obstruct this.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
And so I think that they didn't give him a chance.
Yeah.
And so in this result, it's even he won by 10 million votes, and they didn't give him a chance.
Mm-hmm.
In this election, Donald Trump lost by 2 million votes as of today.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't feel anyone should feel like they need to give him a chance.
And more to the point, Obama, the only reason people were opposing him, some of it was policy driven, but a lot of it was race or cultural driven, hate and fear driven. So the opposition to him was driven by negatives, whereas I feel like our voices are in opposition to Trump because of his negativity to so many of us. And so,
well, I think that maybe it could be fear on both sides.
yeah.
That they were afraid of this black man
right,
taking office,
right,
and and they, so many tried to demonize him even,
right,
and called him a
right,
communist, and
right,
they wanted to say he was a
right.
Muslim, and he wasn't born in the country. So people on that side, some of them were frightened of him because of all of this propaganda that was going around. And now, our side, the liberal side, is now frightened of Trump, not because of liberal propaganda, but because of Trump's own words.
Right, and that's
a
a
difference.
huge difference. That is a huge difference, because we're not angry or upset or frightful or anything like that because of anything that is untrue or we didn't witness ourselves. And so when people say give them a chance, I'm sorry, but speaking personally here, I don't feel a lot of get up and go to give someone a chance who used racist propaganda to get elected, who used anti-gay and bigotrous, I don't even know if that's a word, but propaganda and on all that stuff. So I don't feel like I need to give hate a chance. I need him to give the rest of us a chance and not look at us like we need to be demonized. So
and I think that's, if many people like to say now, well, this was just all talk, and he doesn't really believe the things he says, which I don't know if is a good thing or a bad thing,
right?
Because that can go either way,
right?
But if you notice who he's surrounding himself with now, and the people that he's mostly appointing, they're not people that are going to be on the progressive side.
I mean, step one was Steve Bannon.
Steve Bannon,
that
but
is
even
every signal right there.
The education secretary, she has, I guess, her and her family have a long history of contributing to anti-LGBT causes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And Steve Bannon, of course, is a known white nationalist.
Yeah.
And then the only I would say the responsible pick, maybe Nikki Haley from South Carolina, but she's not going to be
She's not
influential.
Because I mean, wasn't she the one who opposed removing the Confederate flag from the state grounds?
I think initially when she ran for office, but after the controversy, she actually backed removing it. So she did the right thing in the end, which actually a lot of white nationalists weren't happy with that.
Of course they weren't.
But they weren't happy with her.
No, I'm sure they weren't. So I mean, all right. So when we met, I was so excited because not only because you're a lovely individual, but also because when you told me that you are the executive editor for South Florida Gay News,
yes,
I was like, interesting. I really want to know more about that and about you and why you do that. So tell us, I guess, introduce my listeners who may not be familiar yet to South Florida Gay News and what that is.
Well, South Florida Gay News is a weekly LGBT newspaper. So we cover, anything that's related to the LGBT community in South Florida and elsewhere. And we're the largest LGBT newspaper in the Southeast United States. So, but mostly our readership, of course, is in South Florida. And we're distributed from West Palm to Key West.
Wow. And how long have you been in this role with them?
I've been here 6 years.
6 years. Wow. And so as an editor-in-chief, what exactly do you do? The staff writers write stories or articles, and what do you do?
Well, at a large publication, the role is much different.
Okay.
A large publication is more of a visionary role, and it's not so much hands-on, but because we're a small publication with a very small staff, I do a little bit of everything, whether it's proofing the paper, copy editing, sometimes writing, overseeing the production every week, managing the staff and the dozens of freelancers that I deal with on a regular basis. And then of course including the vision too, and the bigger picture stuff, and the special projects or whatever. So there's a lot involved.
What are the big vision stuff for the publication? What is the big goals, and what's the mission of it?
Well, I think for me, when I came on board, I wanted to make sure we really branched out and moved beyond just the Wilton Manors Broward centric, and we covered Palm Beach County, Miami-Dade, the Keys, other goals that have since I've latched onto, I think, is broadening out beyond the gay white male centric focus of our newspaper before, and look at the other voices, bisexual, lesbian, transgender, looking at their issues specifically, and not being so gay white male oriented.
And I saw I thought it was interesting when I was looking at the site. I got a sense that it also tries to be more broadly applied and kind of make people realize that a gay person is also just like anybody else. Like we are business people, and we care about politics, and we're into entertainment, and just like everybody else. And so how do you balance, trying to tackle making people understand that gay people aren't different just because they're gay, that they're just like everybody else, but also balancing that with addressing specific issues.
I don't really think that's something that we do so much.
Okay.
Because our readership is the LGBT community.
Yeah.
So we don't have to educate people as much as, let's say, a mainstream publication that covers LGBT issues.
Okay.
So when we do education, it's really a lot more nuanced and things that the mainstream publications may never have heard about.
Okay.
Like, covering non-conforming, people out there. The mainstream press can barely grasp a transgender person. Then when you get beyond the binary and, so we don't have to educate on a lot of the topics that you hear in the mainstream press. So we're more, our readership is the LGBT community, so we're speaking directly to them. And so what we do, one thing we do every year, we do like an Out 50, where we spotlight 50 LGBT people making a difference here in South Florida. And it really, when we started that a few years ago, it really showed just how big our community is down in South Florida. I mean, it's really huge. And it was, the first year we did it, I thought, am I going to be able to find 50 people?
I was just thinking that's a pretty big number.
And in the end, we had to cut and
Wow.
cut and cut and cut. And every year it's been that way.
Yeah.
Like, we've never been like, okay, we need more people.
Right. That's great.
Yeah, I know, it is great.
What have been some of the more captivating people that you've spotlighted?
Oh, there's been hundreds now. But,
I'm sure.
we don't focus on, in that particular project, we don't focus, I stay away from celebrities.
Right.
Because everyone knows about them.
Right.
So it's really your average, everyday person that's really making a big difference.
Good. I love that a lot. But to speak on celebrities, I did see that the cover story on the website, at least today, I don't know.
It changes every day.
Okay. Was Ellen DeGeneres receiving the Medal of Freedom.
Yeah. And
so yesterday morning, I brought up the whole ceremony on TV, and I have a 4.5-year-old son, and I told him, let's watch this, because I want to tell you who each of these people is, right? And so I explained who Bobby De Niro was, and I was explaining who Michael Jordan is, blah, blah, blah. And I said, Tom Hanks is the guy, the train conductor from Polar Express. You see, it's exactly the same guy, and he also does the voice for Woody on Toy Story. So we're going through everything. And we got to Ellen, and she was so emotional. And so I was explaining to her, who she was, and I was so proud of her in that moment, for her in that moment. But what was a moment like that historically? Like, if you had to kind of put something like that in history, certainly 50 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. Less likely. So
you mean Obama giving an award like that out?
Well, I mean, on so many levels. First of all, a black president giving an award of anything, being being there, and then to have an openly gay woman receive an award like that, that is just it's the highest honor for civilian honor, probably just about in the land. I think that was such a moment. It caught me up. What was it like for you?
I think it was for that moment was, I think, just Ellen's reaction to it. And then even Obama, I think he choked up.
Yeah.
And he, when he was presenting the award.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a moment that it's bittersweet, I think, because this is the last ceremony like that he's giving.
I know.
And he's given it to Ellen, this iconic lesbian woman.
Yeah.
And now we're moving to a Trump presidency.
Yeah.
So I can just imagine who he's going to give these awards to.
Let me tell you.
And I mean,
when I was watching it, I actually tweeted this out. I was like, how ironic that we're watching this Medal of Freedom ceremony, and next year the recipients will be receiving it from someone who I don't think could ever deserve to earn it himself.
Yeah, well,
in my humble opinion.
Well, according to himself, I'm sure he's deserved many of them.
Multiple. He can't understand why he hasn't been invited every year. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, it was a really powerful moment for me to watch, and I was really happy that for my son, even though he can't conceptualize that he's 4.5, but just for him to still see that, and later maybe I can explain a little more how significant it was.
Well, and I think that's the one of the hard things about covering the LGBT community and speaking to our readers is that the LGBT community is the only community that intersects with everybody. Like there are LGBT Christians and Jews and Muslims, there are LGBT blacks and browns and just everything.
Right.
So we have all these intersections.
Right.
So sometimes it can get overwhelming. Leading a newspaper like this, because you really have to decide what to cut,
right,
what to cover,
right,
what not to cover, because anything that we cover can be relevant,
right,
because we have so many intersections.
Right. Do you ever find there's discourse in the community, like people say, I really don't think that you guys cover, I don't like the angle of that story that you guys shared, and I don't really think that served our community well, or something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like what if people...
Well, anytime there's a story that casts an LGBT person or organization in a negative light, we get blowback. Because some people feel our job is to just promote the good things. And the owner of the newspapers, he always comes back with and says, we are here not to just cover the triumphs, but also the warts and the wounds, because that's what a newspaper does.
Yeah.
That even though we are LGBT, we're still a newspaper,
right? And
we have to give the good with the bad.
Yeah.
And there is bad, and when there is bad, we need to expose it, because oftentimes the mainstream publications, they're not going to dig that deep into our community. So if there's something going on that's wrong, we have to be the ones to expose ourselves.
Right.
Because that makes our community stronger, more reputable, more credible going forward.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think you are looking at it deeply from a perspective of a true journalist, because a true journalist just wants the true story out there and all of it, warts and all, right? Yeah. And I noticed when I was looking into your background a bit more that you studied communications with the journalism track at FAU. You're former president of the Florida chapter of Society for
Professional Journalists.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So clearly journalism is your background, very strongly. What draws you to journalism?
I think being able to make a difference. And when I was in college, I had the opportunity to write a lot of exposés, investigative stories that really made a difference on campus. Right,
because you were editor-in-chief at the
student newspaper.
Right, yeah.
And when I was there, the student body president was forced to resign over my stories because I exposed embezzling.
Wow.
So that taught me right there that, yes, journalists, we can make a change. We can make a change. But even beyond that, it showed me that change can come from a smaller publication.
Right. And
it showed me that the student newspaper, no one else in this world, not CNN, not Sun Sentinel or Miami Herald, they weren't going to invest the resources to expose a scandal with the student government on FAU's campus. And that's why the student newspaper is there. And so coming from there to an LGBT publication like this, there are things that are in our community that no one else is going to write about. No one else is going to care about until we write about it.
I find it interesting because I don't know if everybody who goes into working for a student paper, or I've talked to some other people who are like in the radio business, and so they worked at the university radio stations. Usually, they don't take it very seriously, right? They know that the student paper, student radio, they kind of go into it, and at least people that I've spoken to, I won't name any names, but the general consensus has been, it's just something we do for fun. The real stuff will be after we graduate, blah, blah, blah. But it sounds like you walked in there and took it seriously.
Well, that's mainly because we had an advisor who taught us to take it seriously.
Okay.
So that was a lot, that came from him. And a lot of my colleagues at the student newspaper took it very seriously. And I even go back at least once a semester to talk to them, to help them, to,
Nice.
And I communicate with, I've always communicated with, people that came after me at the student newspaper to guide them whenever they wanted, anytime they needed help, I would always be there. I still am. But no, and I think that's a mistake to take it not seriously, because any newspaper has the ability to make change.
I agree, especially because you never know what's going to break out. Like you were talking about your story that involved embezzlement, and obviously that broke something. But I'm thinking even like South Florida Gay News, if maybe that they focus on a very particular niche subject, but it causes this ripple effect. You never know what's going to break out and affect change, like you were talking about. Yeah, it can be really, really great. How do you see journalism in a newspaper playing a role in kind of gearing how society looks at the LGBT community and can kind of shift focus on what society as a whole thinks of LGBT community and how accepting?
Repeat that.
So how do you think a newspaper can help move that along and it can help influence that cause and that
mainstream papers?
Yeah. Well, no. So South Florida Gay News, it has a readership. It has people that are involved, and that they take their news sources from it, and they consider your opinions seriously. So I'm thinking, we as a society are constantly evolving and progressing, and what we accept, what we're willing to see, and what we're willing to accept. So I think when it comes to journalism, historically through, slavery, civil rights acts, marriage equality, all of it, journalism plays such a key role because it exposes stories, it brings to light things. So when it comes to the position of a newspaper or publication influencing the story, influencing the progression. Yeah. How do you hope that South Florida Gay News can conquer that?
Well, I think that, journalism itself is very influential in how we perceive things. One of the decisions we just made was a couple publications, Think Progress, and then another publication decided that they're no longer going to use the term alt-right, and they're going to replace it for what they believe it is, which is white nationalism.
Okay.
And when I read that, I, as a journalist, and then as a, someone that runs a newsroom, I realized that I felt like they were correct. And so I told my staff we would be making the same decision, that we were going to call it for what it is. It's white nationalism. And so, it's even though we only speak to the LGBT community, the media is very influential on how we perceive things. Absolutely. And how that particular readership perceives things. Like during the, I think one of the turning points in the Vietnam War, for instance, was back then, every single morning when someone went and picked up their newspaper, they saw images, horrific images from the war. And so it turned the public against that war. And there were protests, and there was a lot of hostility towards the war.
Right.
During the Iraq War, on the other hand, those images were censored. And so it was sort of like out of sight, out of mind. And
I think for a time journalists weren't allowed to capture the caskets.
Yeah, the Bush administration wouldn't allow it.
Yeah.
So we were so censored that we didn't really see what was going on, and seeing is believing, as they say, and so I think it's again it's putting we have to back to the warts and wounds.
Yeah.
We can't censor it just because we don't like it.
Yeah. Yeah. There needs to be awareness on all angles, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about you mentioned the Vietnam War, and I'm thinking about it made me think about the what's going on in Syria right now with all the bombings in Aleppo, and there have to be journalists that go into these places and risk their lives in order to get the story out. And I think Richard Engel from I think he's on NBC. He's a reporter for NBC, and he actually got kidnapped a couple years ago. He and his photog in Palestine, I want to say. I could be wrong, but that's because he needed to get the story out. And there's definitely a dedication there that I think journalists tend to have when they're true journalists.
Well, I think this has been such an issue with even the last year and a half with the election.
Yeah.
Is that it's very difficult for journalists to cut through all the bullshit.
All the fake news.
And seeing all of the fake news. And, fake news isn't so bad. It becomes worse when, I guess, people of authority start pushing the fake news and start disseminating it and start, forwarding it and whatnot. And you see that a lot through, like, a lot of the Republicans, for instance. They've created this false narrative of the refugee crisis and which is it's just so sad to see the people that are most marginalized and most vulnerable,
most desperate,
demonized. Yeah. And I was just watching this segment on Full Frontal, Samantha Bee's Full Frontal, love her, and how these refugees don't get to pick which country they go to. Just a very small fraction of them actually get to go to any country. Right. And the people that they said the single men, as Republicans were, the single men of fighting age, a lot of those single men of fighting age are actually LGBT refugees. And I, doubt that they're out there, as the terrorists. They're the ones being victimized. Right,
absolutely.
And so, being able to come here as a refugee is a huge, change their life, forever. And
it gives them life.
Yeah, it gives them a chance to live. And so the way that story itself has just been so manipulated, so twisted, and oftentimes you don't hear all of that. You just hear the demonization of them. And then it stops there. Yeah. Like, you don't have journalists coming back and saying, well, the candidate says this, but actually in reality it's this, and this. Yeah. And oftentimes they can't do that because the story would go from 200 words to 800 because if you have to do that after every single statement they make.
And because people are too lazy to read past the headline or the first few sentences. And
that too.
And the truth would just be buried. There was a documentary I just recently watched. I think it was on Netflix. It was called 13. I highly recommend it. Essentially what the documentary is, it charts the progression of how African Americans have been systematically regulated to this second-class status in the country. And it started, of course, with slavery. And then Jim Crow, and then the prison systems and the drug laws and all that stuff. So it's just kind of showed this progression. But what really, so many points about it struck me, but one point in particular was after abolition and slaves were freed, there are all these, millions of people. What do you do with them? Where do they go? They don't have anything. They just went from being property to having nothing, still have nothing, but nowhere to go. So the answer at the time was, we're just going to arrest all of them. And we're going to make them inmates of the state and force them to, push them into forced labor. And so there was this narrative that had to be kind of perpetuated that black men in particular were particularly susceptible to being criminals and violent and raping women and all this stuff. And the cartoon caricatures in the newspapers that were written, drawn up, and all of this stuff to create a narrative that clearly was false about people, and to create a fear and use as propaganda. And I was like, wow, that is so similar to what's being happening right now with Muslims, with refugees, in certain cases with Mexicans, with immigrants in general. So
the transgender community.
And exactly, and the list just goes on, and that's the power of the pen can be wielded in such different ways. And fake news is just such a terrible problem. I think I saw that like Facebook, 30% of the stories on Facebook in the election were fake.
In fact, I just unfollowed a friend that shared a post. You know, he's gay, he's Jewish, and he shared a post from Ben Carson that was talking about, you know, accept the results, etc. And I unfollowed him after that, and I said, listen, you know, Ben Carson is someone that has compared same-sex marriage to bestiality and made other very offensive statements against our community.
Yeah.
Why are you sleeping with the enemy here?
Right.
Why are you sharing this news from not just that particular one, but then share this very, very just blatantly racist post about it was so asinine. It was just ridiculous, you know.
Yeah.
But it was so racist in nature, and I'm like, and I went on his face on that one. I actually commented and argued a little bit, but now I just said, you know what? I just have to unfollow.
It's tough. It's really tough when you see something like that. That's, you know, and to go kind of back to what we were talking about earlier when people were saying, oh, give them a chance, give them a chance. The hard thing about it is the constant reminders of the degradation that occurred from him during his campaign. And those constant reminders are coming from people who say give him a chance, are coming from the white nationalists / alt-right / inner, you know, whatever you want to describe them, enter it here, groups that are shoveling and now are emboldened to say and do things that 5-10 years ago they wouldn't have had the balls to do. You know, my cousin was just walking down the street. She lives in Queens, New York, of all places, walking down the street with her daughters, and this old man leans over and whispers in her ear as she's walking by the N-word. And, you know, people are emboldened by the language of someone that was in a position of leadership. And it's really, really sad that that's how things are right now. So I hope moving forward that more voices like yours, like all the other protesters that were out that night, wonderful, wonderful night, can be lifted and raised up and become louder than that one megaphone.
Well, my concern, my fear is, you know, I've seen some progressives lately making statements about they're willing to work with Trump, such as Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders.
Elizabeth Warren?
And
oh God, I thought she was no.
You know, they said they're willing to work with him if it's going to advance the interests of the, you know, working class America, etc.
Oh, okay, I did hear her say that. Yeah.
But my big concern is that, you know, the progressive left during the primaries, for instance, did speak to that anger, did speak to that sort of working class person,
right.
And then Trump did too.
Right.
So my concern here is that the progressives may sell us out, us minorities out, if they get, you know, a couple dollars raised for the minimum wage, or if they get some other what they perceive economic justice, you know, that it tackles, let's say, income equality, and at the cost, at the expense of minority rights. You know, let's say there is a bill to raise the minimum wage to $10 an hour, but in that bill, we ban all Muslims. Is it worth it?
Right.
You know?
And then because then the narrative is if a Democrat or progressive doesn't support it, then all that someone will focus on during their next election cycle will be, oh, you didn't want to raise the minimum wage.
Yes.
When in reality, they're saying, no, there's this other thing in there that
Yes.
I couldn't support. So I hear what you're saying. Politics is a very dicey thing, and I would hate for people that we look at as our stalwarts, like Elizabeth Warren, like Bernie Sanders. Yes, I think, if Trump ends up being the president, I still say there's an if there, but if he does, yes, let's work with him in the sense of, it is what it is. We have to move forward, but let's make sure that we don't give up or give into what we know is right.
One, that's the concern, is that are they willing to, are progressives willing to sell out the minorities in favor of what they perceive as income equality? And that's why some of these statements made by progressives right now are a little bit concerning.
Yeah.
Is that if Trump does support raise the minimum wage or support some other progressive measure,
right?
Are they going to turn the other way when he disparages blacks and
disparages
Muslims or immigrants or anybody else?
We'll raise the minimum wage, but we're also sticking in this line about our deportation task force. So
let's say we'll raise the minimum wage to $12 an hour,
right.
But as long as businesses get to discriminate against LGBT couples.
There you go.
Yeah. Is it worth it? Is it worth
Right.
the cost? And will they have the backbone to stand up to him at that point? Because they've preached, they've become sort of this. I feel like they've become this single issue situation where it's all income inequality, and what I think Hillary Clinton spoke to, and other African American leaders and whatnot. They said there's still this institution of racism and homophobia and Islamophobia and xenophobia and all these other isms out there that income equality doesn't solve all of those other problems.
Right.
It's like with the drug laws and how cocaine, you would get one sentence, but crack would give you a much harsher sentence.
Right. And you're more likely to be convicted of it because of the color of your skin to begin with.
Yes, so income equality is not going to solve
it. Only gets you so far,
Stop and frisk has nothing to do with income equality, and it targets the black community.
Absolutely.
And Trump is someone,
otherwise is deluding themselves.
Trump has, basically been, so for this stop and frisk.
And he's using code words like, he's using a little more blatant like stop and frisk, but then he'll use code words like, I want to be the law and order president. And when you look back at, was it Nixon? I almost want to say, was it even Reagan? I'm drawing a blank right now, but someone was using that exact same language, and it meant, tougher. I think it may have actually been Reagan, because it was tougher drug laws and all this stuff, and it totally targeted the African American community. It was awful. So, but getting back to South Florida gay news. Looking at the next. Since we have been talking about politics so much, looking at the next 4 years, if what is day by day, perhaps more and more inevitable happens on January 9th, darn it, January 20th, I should know this. Okay, so Trump is inaugurated. The next 4 years, as potential major issues arise for the gay community, LGBTs, how do you feel like South Florida Gay News should work towards combating such issues? For example, like let's say there tries to be some sort of national mandate against gay marriage. I had my friend Jen on the phone with me. I think it was the day of the protests as I was driving there. She and her wife have been together forever. And she was so concerned that with this new presidency, her now legal marriage, something could be dissolved there. So it could be threatened. So if and when these things start to happen, that threaten the gay community, threaten transgenders, how do you see South Florida Gay News' role in helping to buffer against all of that and pushing back against that?
I wish I could say, we're going to make a big difference on the national stage, but we're not. but we can make a difference on the local stage. So when Wilton Manors, for instance, which is the second gayest city in America, we're based right there. And we can make a difference there when there's a progressive measure that comes before the city council, and we put pressure on them, and we write editorials, and we write news stories. Like a big issue that they finally just got passed through was transgender health care. Adding that to the...
What specifically? Because I'm thinking, what do you mean? Why wouldn't they have health care? So what was I don't mean to sound completely stupid, but...
That would cover their transition costs,
okay.
Their hormones,
right,
or their breast removal, or their other, those type of surgeries.
Okay, so not general health care specific for the... Okay, gotcha.
Because those things aren't mandated by, let's say, the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
So cities have been taking it upon themselves to add it to their employee benefits plans. And so it's those type of issues that bring equality and justice at the local level.
Yeah.
That's what we can do, and we can do it well because we are so involved in the local community. I wish we could make a difference on the national stage, but there's other outlets that can do that better than we can.
Who do you like communicate with in other areas? Is there like a network of like journalists of publications that are LGBT focused? Does that exist? Do you guys like communicate with each other and try to work together on anything? I mean, I don't even know what I'm asking.
I happen to know a lot of them. Across the country. But there's like the National Gay Media Association, which is made up of the top 10 or 12 LGBT publications, newspapers in the country. And then I belong to a listserv that's sort of, that's an LGBT activist listserv that a lot of the LGBT journalists belong to and are involved with. So that's how I keep in contact with them.
Gotcha, okay.
And there is one, the Philadelphia Gay News. They spearhead every year a collaborative project about LGBT History Month. So they ask for contributors around the country to contribute LGBT history articles.
What month is that?
In October. So every October we work together, and this year I think at South Florida Gay News submitted 2 pieces to the project. And
wait a minute, how did you guys get a month with 31 days and we only got a month with 28? What is up with that? I protest.
Well, there are many LGBT Black people, so...
This is true. Very, very true. So what do you see as, more generally, the future for the publication and the future for you and your journalism career?
More generally, every print publication is sort of nervous right now because just the way that print's been going,
Mean more digital, or do you mean?
It's just been, a lot of print publications are struggling because of, ad revenue is down and whatnot. So things are changing so fast. It's sometimes hard to adjust so quickly to the next big thing.
Yeah.
It's like we're just now getting adjusted to Facebook, and what's the next big thing that we're going to have to adjust to?
Right.
And for a small paper like me, we don't have like millions of dollars to invest in the next big thing. So it can get overwhelming.
Right.
So, but I still think that content is king, and as long as you continue to produce quality content that matters and makes a difference, you'll continue to be relevant.
What are the kind of stories that make the most difference to you? What matters the most to you?
I think any story that really brings about some sort of change. Recently we wrote a story about a gay teacher that was fired from a Christian school in Boca that really generated a lot of hits and a lot of interest. And a few years ago when I first started, I did a big story on the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department that they had set up a sting operation to entrap men in parks who were looking for sex. and a lot of the tactics they used were really not on the up and up, let's say, you know. So in that particular piece, I went through 300 or more police reports.
Wow.
And I scoured, you know, every single one. I created a database around of it. Yeah. And so those type of things really excite me.
Yeah.
You know, those type of really in-depth investigative type pieces.
I was just going to say, it's the investigative part seems like it really jazzes you up. That's good. So I've been, so I'm in my 30s, and I've been, you know, I'm not gay, and I've been a supporter but an observer, let's say, of the progression of the struggle, so to speak, right? And I remember, so when I was in college, my friend, who I'll save his name for myself, but he was from Jordan, Middle East, and of course that area of the world is notorious for being just disgustingly hateful, and so he had to live his life basically putting on airs that he wasn't gay. And we met in college in New Orleans, where you could be very, very gay, very, very gay. He had the greatest time. But I remember he called me one day. He was terrified because his parents were coming for a visit. And all of a sudden, he needed to figure out how to get his true self-world that he built for himself in New Orleans and put this fake gloss over it, so his parents couldn't see through when they came down, right? And so I'm talking him through this and helping just being supportive, not making any decisions for him whatsoever. I remember when his parents got in town, and there was a part of him that shifted, where he just said, I can't do this anymore. And he asked me, he said, will you help me? And I said, of course I will. And to sit in that room with him and his parents, and I actually was the one who told them that he was gay, and to experience that with him, that terror that he was feeling in that moment, he was just shaking. He couldn't even talk. And so that was so many years ago. And then to see, you know, we've had marriage bills that are passed, and there've been some steps in the right direction, and then we have bathroom bills being passed, and it's like a step backwards, you know? And it's just this constant ebb and flow, and hopefully it continues to be in the right direction. I am nervous, you know, and I'm glad to hear what you're talking about, more cities and putting together pieces into their healthcare to help support transgenders. My good friend Drew, who's transgender, you know, he told me a lot about the expenses that are involved in that. It's insane to me. So I guess I'm saying all this to say this, that, you know, there's been a progression towards the positive in the last however many decades, but there's clearly still a long way to go. If you were to wave like a magic wand and say, this is the main issue I wish I could resolve today, right now, what would you ask for?
The main issue.
Yeah.
You know, the past decade or more, we've been so focused on marriage equality that we've kind of, especially in the LGBT community, it's been sort of bittersweet, because the marriage equality has really galvanized the LGBT community and really gave us this single issue that we all could fight for. But it came at a cost, a big cost, and that was we ignored a lot of other issues. And so now that issue is over, or for the most part over, the entire LGBT community has sort of lost its footing. We don't know what our next big issue is. And so it's hard to answer that question, because the entire community is struggling with that question right now. And, you know, because we don't have someone that's friendly in office, I think the big issue, our main focus now is just stop the bleeding and make sure nothing bad happens. because I don't think we're going to progress very much in the next 4 years.
Yeah.
We just have to try to limit our losses.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
You
Hold
know,
on tight for the ride, and
yes.
hopefully we all make it through the other side.
Like one of the issues here that hasn't really gained any traction in Florida was, like in North Carolina, they sort of passed that law at the state level that overruled all the local laws protecting LGBT people. We haven't had to face that here. If we do, that could be huge, very damaging to especially South Florida.
Oh, yeah.
Because we live in this sort of very progressive bubble.
Oh, totally.
And
we kind of forget that it's just a bubble right here.
And there's like over 140 local laws that protect LGBT people here in Florida. 80 of them are like in Palm Beach County alone.
Wow.
So these local activists have spent decades, educating politicians, including Republicans, on protecting the LGBT community, and they've done a damn good job. And so that to me is a big fear, actually, at the state level, is if they feel empowered by the Trump win, will they push something like that here in Florida?
That's been my, after he won the election, I told people I'm less worried about Trump and much more worried about everyone else on the down tickets, everyone at the local levels, who, exactly what you're saying, feel emboldened and feel like they now have a base of support to push these things through that are just be devastating to a lot of people. So, like I said, hold on tight. It's going to be a bumpy ride. That's for sure. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. And I'm glad that South Florida Gay News has someone so strong at the helm who clearly cares deeply about journalism and the integrity that it takes to put out a really solid publication. So thank you so much for talking to me today. Where can people find and follow South Florida Gay News?
If they go to sfgn.com, and that's where you can find us online, or look for us on Facebook, South Florida Gay News. A lot of people nowadays, that's how they get our news, is through Facebook. And the locations, we have like 300 locations around South Florida, so that would take a really long time to mention all of those right now. But we do have a list online that we can find it.
So if they want the actual paper in their hands, there's plenty of locations for them to get to find it. That's great. And how about you?
But every tri-rail station now in South Florida has us, so
very nice.
That's an easy one.
Very nice. And how about you? Where can people find and follow you online?
Jason Parsley. Twitter, it's J.E. Parsley. Facebook is Jason Parsley.
All right.
I'm very public and easily findable.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much. Do you want to sign off the podcast? It's super easy. Just say, this is Jason Parsley with Curve the Cube.
This is Jason Parsley with Curve the Cube.
Yay, high five. Very good. Yay, thank you. You're so great.
You have successfully curved the cube.